This is Red Raider here to show you my awesome Red Raider Nuke Psyker build in the full release of Warhammer 40k Inquisitor Martyr by Neocore Games. Start us off here, we will show you our dual relic warp rods. We have critical hits inflicting shock on the target, 50 HP, 2.9 to all damage, 9 damage to bleeding, suppression. You want to be getting to crit chances, damage to bleeding, hitting enemies that are inflicted by vulnerabilities due to critical hits inflicting shock on the target. Our inoculator is set up for bloodbath, actually blood balm, friends on, and 2 capacity extenders. We have warp bound armor with our psychic focus, and these are important right here to get your extra psychic skills. We will take you over here to our attributes where we have all into resilience. Anything else that we accumulate on our way 250 will be going into psi focus. For perks, we're running retrograde psychic dominion. Running this perk gives you damage bonus inversely to your warp heat that your psyker is generating. So if you are at 0 warp heat, you are dealing plus 100% damage, which is a very good modifier to run. This build runs on very low warp heat as is. If you run your skills correctly in their cooldown, you will stay very low warp heat and be doing massive damage. Friends on Dispenser, that procs with all of our inoculator and every other crit that we have accumulated, and that is already calculated into our crit chance. So this gives us a plus 10 critical hit chance, but at a cost of negative 10 max HP. Now, when I toggled this skill in and out, it was only a difference of about 300 hit points. Running the Teledome very much mitigates that loss, and as well as the inoculator and the rest of our skill set that we'll explain later on. Attack Anchor, 5% damage per second while standing still with a maximum of 50% damage done. This is a really great skill to have with this caster. You will find yourself standing still and casting from afar and attacking enemies at a distance. So you can see our crit hit chance over here is at 30% with a crit hit strength of 29%. And again, this is without our inoculator effects added in. So when we throw in our inoculator effects of Friends on, we get a bit more crit hit chance. Take you over here to our skills tab now. As you can see here, I am still working my last little bits into the AoE tree, but I will have that cleared up as soon as I hit 50, so you can guarantee that these will all be maxed out. This is very much needed for this build, and if you're not running the full AoE tree on this build, you're going to suffer a little bit. I have the same thing to say about the critical tree with the caveat of Warp Shock. Warp Shock you can do without. It doesn't really matter because you want to be running at low warp heat. If you think you're going to find yourself running upwards of warp heat, not so bad to have in there as well, just because you'll still get a crit chance, running at low or high. Movement tree as well, we are going to spec the whole left side of this tree with leaving out Psychic, Prod, and Quickening, just because these skills don't really seem to matter. Kills grant 20% movement speed bonus for 5 seconds. That one could be beneficial later on if you want to start doing speed clears. Very important here is also 4 points into HP. Field Surgery is a very overrated perk, and it is very useful when in combat. It will reset your inoculator to 0% cooldown, meaning you can use it instantly if your health ever drops below 25%. You will want to put 1 point into Psychic Combat to get the Exploit Weakness rune to attach to a skill that we will cover later on. Blood Balm gives us 20% max HP for 20 seconds. Friends on giving us 10% increased critical hit chance and a plus 40 critical hit strength for 5 seconds. You have 2 extracts to increase the inoculator capacity as well. Start off here at the psychic powers. You can see that we're using Warp Blast. Warp Blast is a attack that is doing area of effect and a shock damage. Area of effect is a 3-meter wide circle, and shock applies a negative 40% movement and attack speed to the target for 5 seconds, but it only applies to targets with a yellow suppression bar. In using this attack, you will always clear 5% warp heat from your warp heat bar. Our secondary attack is Witchfire, and this is the big strike of lightning that you see enter the screen. This is our big damage dealer. It does a large area of effect of 6 meters, and it does knock back to targets with a yellow suppression bar and knock down to targets with a red suppression bar. Deals 436 damage and takes away 5 warp heat as well. Now it does have a longer than 3-second cooldown, which is why we do spec into the movement tree. Our next damage dealing attack in this set is Hemorrhage. Hemorrhage as well does a large 6 meter area of effect. If targets are in a yellow suppression, they suffer the hallucination vulnerability, which applies a 40% miss chance and a negative 20% movement speed to the target for 5 seconds. All targets caught within the area effect suffer a DOT of bleeding that is slash damage equal to 20% of the original hit damage per second for 5 seconds. Now, to go over the attacks that the skills that we use, the psychic powers that we use to buff those attacks, we are using Divine Shot and Misfortune. Starting off with Divine Shot, both of these are self and blessings. Divine Shot does 30 seconds of 100% damage for the first time you attack a target with an attack, meaning that this attack will do 100% damage, and then so will Witchfire do 100% damage the first time I attack a target with those attacks. The runes that I'm using on these are Increased Skill Effectiveness, Increased Skill Duration by 50%, and Reduced Skill Cooldown by 25%. Onto Misfortune, which is also a self-blessing. It changes the armor category of a heavily armored enemy to armored and an armored enemy to unarmored against all the caster's attacks for 10 seconds. The runes I am using on this are Reduced Skill Cooldown by 25%, Increased Skill Duration by 50%, and Increased Skill Effectiveness. If you ever forget these combinations, you remember that Divine Shot and Misfortune always use the same runes. Hemorrhage gets a different set of runes where we increase the area of effect by 25% or add 1 to the number of targets affected by the skill. We are running the critical chance by 10%, which is a rune you have to unlock in the skill bar, which we will also go over. Reduces skill cooldown by 25%. To go off the Teledome, it is increases skill duration by 50%, reduces skill cooldown by 25%, and increases skill effectiveness. Okay guys, here I will be showing you the effectiveness of this build in combat, active. You can see this mission is a negative 70% damage dealt and a plus 194% damage suffered. Here we go. You always want to go off into combat with your Teledome. My pain. Set up. The crits that you deal are going to give you the cooldown you need to pretty much keep that open and keep that running 100% of the time. As you can see, I already have mine open. That Plague Marine shattered it quickly, but it still buffed the damage as it was meant to. My line of progression will always go Hemorrhage, Witchfire, then Warp Blast to clear up everything else, using Divine Shot and Misfortune when I need to take out bigger targets that end up attacking. This build is really effective at generating high crit numbers. That is one thing that gets mentioned the most when I'm live streaming this game is just the crazy amount of crit numbers. You can see them right there. When I shoot a crit into a crowd, it's quite effective. The heat right there really puts a toll on me. And you can see this melee really has that as well. Have no fear, there is always the Australian field guide. You'll find this build really effective for doing crowd control on the big, large groups of enemy like that. And then you'll have one heavily armored champion really come in and beating you down, getting right up in your face as the melee.
Now you are gone.
melee enemies and some of the bigger, more powerful enemies have been criticized for being too slow and clunky to move their way up to you. But when you're focusing on doing damage to a hunk of meat that is barely taking any hit points damage, it's still just as effective. And you can see me here kind of kiting this dreadnought around. Where you get a good moment to proc the Telidome and the Cyclone Frenzy and knock it over. Do some worthy damage numbers.
Repent!
One thing I will say is we probably are expected to see a bit of a maybe a nerf or a debuff in some of the damage done by Witchfire, which is another one that is really giving a lot of these really high damage numbers and crits when you see it going off in a crowd.
Negative singularity.
Martyr here just taking damage, really, even though he is just completely stunned by crowd control effect. Head over here and clear out this little last batch of enemies as well. Show you some more of just how effective this build can be in the crowd clearing section of what could possibly be some potential end game in what we might be seeing in the war zone and everything that follows whenever the war zone does open up. Again, zooming in is not everyone's way to play, but when you can see your character's armor customization that you've been putting together, it really is just the nice final touch that Neocore has added to this game with being able to change your character's appearance, colors, and weapons, and other things tied to your character's appearance. Here you see one of the champion psychers, a villain enemy. Quite the worthy opponent to stack up against him. He is just completely shredded. Again, with those high crit numbers from the hemorrhage, you can really see it
eliminated. Enemy command structure compromised.
And that's why it's so important to focus on the AoE tree.
End of log.
If you like the video, please be sure to like, subscribe, give me some comments and feedback, what you like about the build, what you like about the full release of the game, and any other interesting, awesome information that you'd like to give me.